Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host.
Hi, listeners, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries podcast. It is my pleasure today for this particular repatriation summit to introduce my friend and colleague, Chris O'Shaughnessy. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I want to be using my Irish accent of the fact that we both have Irish names.
It's very true. It's very true. I've loads of G's and H's in O'Shaughnessy, hidden G's and H's that people wouldn't expect.
Exactly.
We keep them for emergency purposes. You never know when you might need an emergency G.
And with a name like Cumberford, you never know when you might need another consonant.
This is very true. This is very true. By our powers combined, we've got a lot of the alphabet covered.
So thank you for coming to talk to us a little bit about repatriation. Could you please tell me just a little bit of your backstory about when you repatriated and how that went? Those are the big questions for today.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I would say, hopefully I'm an example of how wide the term repatriation can cover, because I was born in the UK and I'm a dual national. My family is American, although my father wasn't born in the UK or the US. My father was born in Germany and grew up in France, like you do, but is American. So for me, technically being American, I started out in school in the UK and moved around quite a bit. And at 18, having a US passport, even though I'd only been in the US just for a couple of years as a child, at 18, I graduated from an American military school in the UK and decided, well, I'm American, so, I should go try living in America. That's what Americans do.
Yes.
And so that I'd say was sort of my repatriation. And it was a funny one because my only actual experience in the US was for a few years when I was in second and third grade, I think. And so I'd never lived there as an adult. And I think that's one of the interesting things about repatriation is it can look so very different. That for some people, repatriation is coming back to somewhere familiar. For other people, repatriation, it might be returning in the broadest sense to somewhere that you've told about, that the idea is familiar. And so at 18, I did. I moved to the US. I was going to try out college in America because I am American. And so that matches up. And I made some terrible assumptions. And I assumed that because I'd grown up around US military bases, that would help me understand American culture. But American culture and military culture are quite distinct. And I think this is something that has led me to this little piece of advice that from my own experience, I try to share with other people. And that is that in repatriation, I think it's actually very important to treat the country that you're repatriating or returning to, treat it like a foreign country. And this is especially true, I think, with a country you have some familiarity with. So a lot of third culture kids that I know, and when I get to work with schools, many of them will be repatriating for college or university. And that repatriation, again, covers such a broad spectrum. Maybe they've never actually lived in their passport country, but they've got some familiarity with it because family is there or because of the media. Maybe you're choosing to go to college, university in the US, which is all over the media, or even the UK, which has a big media presence, or a European country, or wherever it is that you've got some degree of familiarity with. That familiarity actually causes problems because if you're moving to a completely foreign country, you'd be on high alert. You'd be on the lookout for things that are different. Your empathy would be pinging really high because you'd be trying to figure out, what do I do to belong here? And the danger with repatriation is we turn some of that off because we think, oh, I got this. Like, I'm American, so of course I know how to live in America. Or maybe you grew up there or what have you. But regardless of how long you've been away or what have you, things will have changed and you will have changed. Your time outside the country, whether that was your whole life or just a spell of it, your time outside the country has changed you, and the country that you're returning to has changed. And so you can actually set yourself up better by treating it like it's foreign, even if it's familiar. It's less familiar than you think. And so, because I found it myself. My trip there at 18, again, thought, well, I grew up in the military. That's the same thing. It's absolutely not the same thing. From little things, like for instance, I was very used to, if I went to a movie on base, they play the national anthem before the movie starts on military bases, on American military bases. And so in my mind, I'd made an association that if I'm in a theater with a load of Americans, the only time that ever happened for me was on a military base. So you just know that when the theater gets dark, they're going to do the national anthem. So stand up and
Yes.
be ready. That is not what they do in the United States. In the US, they don't play the national anthem before movies. And so I did. I was tricked into familiarity. And I remember being in the US, making friends. So we went out to see a movie and it got dark. So I stood up because my mind said, well, you're surrounded by Americans, and that means the anthem's going to play before the movie. And of course they don't. And my friends were very embarrassed. I said, what are you doing? Please sit down. And I had to sort of play it off and say, well, I was stretching. I was stretching. You guys don't stretch? You're not going to limber up before the movie? We're going to be sitting a while? Nope, just me? Okay. And had to, try to look not so much like an idiot. But there are loads of things where that will happen, where you're going to be caught off guard, and it's just easier to deal with if you're prepared for it, because it can be it's your ego a bit to think, well, I should know this. So treat a repatriating country as if it's a foreign country.
That sounds like super advice. I loved what you said about familiarity causes problems.
It really does. Or perceived familiarity.
Yes, perceived familiarity. And I have a piece in something that I've been writing called Sequels, about writing the sequel of your life.
Ooh.
And the idea is that, when you come home, what are all the pieces, the hidden expectations, the assumptions, and all this invisible stuff?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good.
And I made a very, very bad assumption. And that's when I was living in the Middle East. I was living in a compound in Saudi Arabia, surrounded by people from Texas and Oklahoma and mostly the South. And I thought I was living in America. And so when I moved back to America, I had lived in America for 10 years, but in a different state. I just thought it would be like that. No.
That's just it, and that's why that perceived familiarity can be dangerous, because we turn off some of the normal things that again we'd be putting energy to observation. You're so much more observant when things are unfamiliar, and you probably just need to be as observant in repatriation.
And so what happens when you do things like stand up at the beginning of a movie anticipating hearing the national anthem? Do you ever get the sense that it's like some large cosmic joke that's being played on you?
I mean, that might be a healthy way to look at it. I do think, with any transition, repatriation or any other transition, a healthy dose of humility and humor is really helpful. And that goes a long way, I think. Because we feel foolish when we don't know things that we should know. And repatriation can be harder because the chances are, because of that familiarity, it's easier to be harder on yourself and think, oh, I should know better. Or even for the people around you, they have no context for why. The people sitting around me at that movie theater had no idea why. They didn't know my history. They didn't know that where I come from, if you're in a movie theater surrounded by Americans, there's probably going to be an anthem played. They had no idea. Yes. And so they're missing parts of my story. I'm obviously missing parts of their collective story. And I think a little bit of sense of humor, a little bit of humility, goes a long way.
A long way.
Yeah, and being able to laugh at yourself.
Definitely. I think that's a perpetual perspective that we need to take if we're choosing to live interculturally, though.
Yeah, it's very true. Very, very true.
And I'm curious, do you give different advice to third culture kids than you do to adults? Because I know that you speak and you teach and you lecture and you cavort and bring the humor in all of these situations to all sorts of age groups. So can you tell me, would you say the same thing to a TCK as an adult, or is there slightly different?
I think there are some slight differences. I mean, I think universally for kids and adults, the idea of in repatriation, treat it as if it's a foreign country, that I would say to everybody. For TCKs, that could look like, again, maybe familiarity through the media, or through maybe you're repatriating to a place that you only visit for short bursts, but it's still expecting it to be the same living somewhere as visiting in short bursts. That's a very different thing. Being a tourist in Brussels is very different than living in Brussels. So I think that part is universal, is treat it as if you don't know the country at all. I think there is some difference for adults and TCKs, though. I would say one of the differences is one of the things I I tell adults, and even in their interaction with third culture kids, is that for repatriation and that sort of thing, language is going to be different. I know for a lot of adults, the concept of nationality is an anchor. So it's a familiarity. So for a lot of adults, they've got that pulling them for a repatriation. I think, well, this is where I came from. It is now where I'm returning to. And that sets us up for, expectations and things, and can cause some difficulty there that, if the country has changed since, which it will have,
Yes.
Everything is perpetually changing. So that'll set you up for differences. It's a different scenario for a lot of third culture kids, because for them, the concept of nationality might be more of, they would use that term more as almost a logistical categorization that, well, that happens to be where I issued my passport, but really it's just this place that I go and see relatives during the summer. And that can actually means that word seems different to third culture kids and adults. And the translation there can be difficult. So for adults who say, well, we're German and we came from Germany, and yes, we raised you most of your life in Singapore,
Yes.
but we're returning to Germany now, and you're going to be German. What the parents are really saying is we use nationality as a shorthand.
Yes.
When we say a nationality, what we're really doing is summing up the values and beliefs and traditions and histories. We sum it all up and shorthand it with a term, with the nationality. Yeah. And I think for third culture kids, that shorthand isn't the same. So for third culture kids, nationality might be more of a logistical thing. They might say, well, yes, I'm German in that I have this document that says I'm German. But having not really lived there, that means something different. It doesn't mean it's less valuable. It just means, I think with third culture kids, it's important to be far more explicit. With adults, they can shorthand it and say, yes, I'm German. I came from Germany. Sure, I spent time outside of Germany, but I know what it is to be German. For third culture kids, you just have to say explicitly and say, well, it means that we believe this and we value this, and these are our traditions. So it's things like that have to be spelled out far more explicitly, I think.
And when I hear you say logistical, what I get a picture of is the things that affect our heads. So the things we think about, the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the labels, but don't necessarily get all the way down to the heart.
Yeah.
So the head is thinking one thing, the heart is feeling another. And that's, I think, sometimes part of the dissonance that goes into repatriating.
Absolutely. Because it is a repatriation, just like any transition, it involves both. I mean, there's a load of logistics and a load of things that have to happen, intellectually and practically. But there's a lot that happens in the heart too. I mean, where you feel like you belong, where your sense of home is, those are all heart issues. And those are going to be in play as well. Are you leaving a place that maybe once you've repatriated, you realize you actually felt more at home, at this other place than you realized? And how do you harmonize that? Will this new place become home eventually? Was it home one time before? And so heart issues like that, the concept of home can actually be far more dynamic than we realize. And that's an okay thing.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your perspective on repatriation and your personal experience, but you really opened our eyes about using humility and humor and how familiarity can cause some problems, and that we need to have some empathy in the process, not only for other people, but for ourselves, especially.
Absolutely.
So thank you for this. This has been a wonderful example of someone who's demonstrated, I think, the thinking and the heartfelt behavior and linking them both together. So we really appreciate this, Chris. Tell us where our listeners can find you, please.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I love getting to do this, so thanks for the opportunity. I can be found most easily at my website, which is www.chris-o.com. So lovely and short and sweet, unlike my surname, just www.chris-o.com.
chris-o.com. And we highly recommend here at Nomadic Diaries that you follow Chris there, plus that you follow him on Diesel and Clooney to unpack the world.
Oh, it is. We have a load of fun.
They have a lot of fun. And that's what we're all about, is creating momentum and movement in the midst of this amazing, beautiful globe that we get to share. Thank you very much, Chris.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.